I was a young soldier on patrol at the Honduras border in 1986 when the creature emerged from the river, a colossal serpent, El Diablo, as the natives called it. The panic set in, but the true terror came afterward when my superiors forced me to deny what we saw. The silence haunts me to this day because I feel we hid something that could have changed the history of that war. My name is Robert Martinez, and I was 22 years old when I witnessed something that would forever alter my understanding of what lurks in the shadows of conflict zones. The year was 1986, and the Cold War was raging not just in Europe, but in the dense jungles and remote valleys of Central America. Nicaragua had become a proxy battleground between Soviet-backed Sandinistas and American-supported Contras, and Honduras served as the staging ground for covert operations that officially didn't exist. I was part of the 27th Combat Engineering Battalion, stationed at a forward operating base near the Rio Coco, which formed much of the natural border between Honduras and Nicaragua. Our mission was officially described as infrastructure support and defensive fortifications, but we all knew we were there to monitor Contra supply lines and provide intelligence on Sandinista movements. The jungle was thick, humid, and alive with sounds that city kids like me had never heard before. Our squad consisted of 8 men under Sergeant Carlos Perez, a hardened veteran who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and spoke fluent Spanish. He was the kind of NCO who could navigate political sensitivities while keeping his men alive in hostile territory. The rest of us were mostly green soldiers: Rodriguez from Texas, Williams from Detroit, Thompson from rural Georgia, and myself from East LA. We'd been in country for 3 months, long enough to lose our initial nervousness, but not long enough to become truly jungle-wise. The locals in the nearby village of El Aguacate had always been friendly but cautious around American soldiers. They'd trade information about Sandinista movements for medical supplies and MREs, but there were topics they simply wouldn't discuss. Whenever we asked about certain areas along the river, particularly a stretch about 10 kilometers downstream from our base, their faces would change. The older villagers would cross themselves and mutter about El Diablo del Rio, the river devil. Sergeant Perez dismissed it as local superstition, the kind of folklore that develops in isolated communities where education is scarce and Catholic mysticism blends with indigenous beliefs. These people see monsters in every shadow, he'd tell us during briefings. Your job is to focus on real threats: Sandinista patrols, weapons smuggling, and Contra supply convoys. Leave the ghost stories to the anthropologists. But the stories were remarkably consistent. El Diablo was described as an enormous serpent, larger than any anaconda ever documented, with eyes that glowed like embers and a roar that could be heard for miles. The creature supposedly lived in the deepest parts of the Rio Coco, emerging only during times of great conflict to feed on the dead and dying. Some claimed it was as old as the jungle itself. Others insisted it was summoned by ancient shamanic rituals gone wrong. On December 15, 1986, our squad was tasked with conducting a reconnaissance patrol along the disputed border zone. Intelligence reports suggested increased Sandinista activity in the area, possibly preparation for a cross-border raid on Contra camps. We were to observe and report, maintaining radio silence unless we encountered immediate threats. The morning started like any other patrol: equipment checks, route planning, and the usual pre-mission nerves. Williams joked about spending Christmas in a Nicaraguan prison if we got captured. Thompson cleaned his M16 for the 3rd time while muttering prayers under his breath. Rodriguez studied our topographical maps, memorizing landmarks and potential extraction points. None of us could have imagined that by sunset we'd be witnesses to something that would make us question everything we thought we knew about the natural world. We set out at 0600 hours, moving in standard patrol formation through the dense jungle canopy. The humidity was already oppressive, and our fatigues were soaked with sweat before we'd traveled the first kilometer. Sergeant Perez took point, followed by Rodriguez with the radio, then Williams, Thompson, myself, and the rest of the squad spread out in tactical intervals. The jungle was unusually quiet that morning. Even Rodriguez, who'd grown up hunting in South Texas, commented on the absence of bird calls and insect noise. "It's like the whole forest is holding its breath," he whispered during our first rest stop. Perez attributed it to recent helicopter activity in the area, but I noticed he kept checking his compass more frequently than usual. By noon, we'd reached the observation point overlooking the Rio Coco. The river was running higher than normal due to recent rains, its muddy brown waters churning with debris and fallen trees. Perez set up our observation post in a cluster of cecropia trees that provided good concealment while offering clear sight lines downstream toward Nicaragua. For the first few hours, everything seemed routine. We spotted a few fishing boats from the Honduran side, and Thompson claimed he saw movement on the far bank that might have been Sandinista scouts, but nothing definitive enough to break radio silence. The heat was brutal, and we took turns at the observation scope, trying to stay alert despite the monotonous jungle sounds. It was around 1500 hours when Rodriguez first noticed the disturbance in the water. "Sarge, you need to see this," he called quietly, pointing downstream about 200 meters from our position. Through the scope, we could see something large moving beneath the surface, creating a wake too big for any fish or caiman we'd encountered before. "Probably a dead tree swept up by the current," Perez said, but his voice lacked conviction. The movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. Whatever was down there was alive and moving against the current with considerable power. Williams grabbed his binoculars and focused on the area. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "That thing's got to be 30 feet long, maybe more. Look at the size of that wake." We all took turns observing the disturbance. The pattern was unmistakable. Something massive was swimming upstream, occasionally breaking the surface just enough to create ripples that spread across the entire width of the river. Thompson suggested it might be a manatee, but manatees don't grow that large, and they certainly don't generate that kind of turbulence. As the afternoon wore on, the disturbances became more frequent and closer to our position. Perez made the decision to extend our observation period, convinced we were witnessing some kind of Sandinista underwater operation, perhaps a submarine or underwater vehicle being used to smuggle weapons across the border. "This could be intelligence gold," he told us. "If the Sandinistas have developed underwater infiltration capabilities, command needs to know immediately." But then the sounds started. At first, it was just a low rumbling that we felt more than heard, like distant thunder or heavy machinery. The local wildlife, which had already been unusually quiet, fell completely silent. Even the ever-present buzz of insects ceased, leaving the jungle in an eerie, unnatural stillness. The rumbling grew stronger, accompanied by what could only be described as a roar, not the roar of any animal we'd ever heard, but something primal and ancient that seemed to vibrate through the very trees around us. Rodriguez dropped his binoculars and reached instinctively for his rifle. "What the hell is making that noise?" Williams whispered, his face pale despite the jungle heat. Perez was scanning the river with intense concentration when he suddenly went rigid. "Contact," he said quietly. "All personnel, eyes on the river, 200 meters downstream." What we saw next defied every rational explanation. The water began to churn violently, as if something enormous was rising from the depths. Massive bubbles broke the surface, followed by what appeared to be coils, thick serpentine coils that glistened dark green and brown in the afternoon sunlight. Thompson was the first to vocalize what we were all thinking. "That's not a submarine. That's not any kind of vehicle. That's a living thing." The creature's head emerged partially from the water, and even at 200 meters distance, its size was overwhelming. The head alone appeared to be larger than our entire patrol boat, with eyes that reflected the sunlight like polished amber. The serpent's body continued to surface in sections, revealing a length that seemed impossible, easily 60 feet, possibly more. For several minutes, the creature remained partially surfaced, as if testing the air or scanning its surroundings. We remained frozen in our observation post, hardly daring to breathe. Rodriguez had his camera ready, but was shaking too badly to take clear photographs. Then the creature turned in our direction. Even from that distance, the intelligence behind those massive eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was studying us with the same intensity that we were studying it. The eye contact lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Sergeant Perez, to his credit, maintained his composure. Nobody moves, nobody makes a sound. If this thing is territorial, sudden movements could trigger an attack. But as if responding to his words, the creature began moving toward our position, its massive body cutting through the water with frightening speed and grace. The wake it created was now visible from shore to shore, and the rumbling sound had evolved into something that could only be described as a hunting call. Williams broke first. "We need to get the hell out of here, Sarge, now." "Negative. We hold position and observe. This could be some kind of Sandinista biological weapon. We need intelligence on its capabilities and behavior patterns." Even in that moment of terror, Perez was thinking like a soldier. But as the creature drew closer, now less than 100 meters from shore, I realized that no human army had created this thing. This was something far older and far more dangerous than any weapon of war. The creature's roar shook the trees around us, and I felt a primal fear unlike anything I'd experienced in combat training. The creature reached the shallows directly below our observation post, and for the first time we could see its full, horrifying magnitude. El Diablo was even larger than the villagers' stories had suggested, easily 80 feet from head to tail, with a body thick enough that a man couldn't wrap his arms around it. Its scales were the size of dinner plates, dark green with bronze patterns that seemed to shift and move in the dappled jungle light. But it was the intelligence in those amber eyes that truly terrified me. This wasn't some primitive reptile operating on instinct. This creature was thinking, calculating, studying us with the patience of a predator that had survived for centuries by being smarter than its prey. Sergeant Perez was frantically whispering into his radio handset, trying to reach base command despite our standing orders for radio silence. "Base, this is Bravo 7. We have a situation that requires immediate extraction. Request helicopter support at grid reference." He paused, looking at the creature, then continued in a strained voice. "We have encountered an unidentified biological threat of significant proportions." The radio crackled with static, then Command's voice came through clearly. "Bravo 7, say again your last transmission. Did you say biological threat?" Before Perez could respond, the creature moved with lightning speed, surging partially onto the muddy riverbank. Its massive head rose 20 feet into the air, swaying back and forth as it examined the jungle canopy where we were hidden. Water cascaded from its scales like a waterfall, and the sound of its breathing was like wind through a cavern. Thompson lost his nerve completely. He scrambled backward from our position, crashing through the undergrowth with all the stealth of a bulldozer. The creature's head snapped in our direction, those ancient eyes locking onto our exact location with predatory focus. "Everybody freeze," Perez hissed, but it was too late. The creature had marked us. What happened next challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The serpent opened its massive jaws, revealing teeth like railroad spikes, and released a sound that was part roar, part hiss, and part something else entirely, something that seemed almost like speech, like words in a language older than human civilization. Rodriguez grabbed my arm with a grip that left bruises. "Martinez, please tell me you're recording this. Please tell me someone's going to believe what we're seeing." I had my camera ready, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Through the viewfinder, the creature looked even more impossible. A living fossil from the age of dinosaurs, somehow surviving in this remote jungle river while the modern world fought its Cold War battles just miles away. The serpent began moving along the shoreline, its massive body creating deep furrows in the mud. It was searching, hunting, using senses we couldn't comprehend to track our exact position. Every few seconds, it would raise its head and taste the air with a forked tongue the size of a man's arm. Perez tried the radio again. "Base, Bravo 7. We need immediate extraction. The biological threat is approximately 80 feet in length. Appears to be a previously unknown species of giant serpent. It has located our position and is displaying aggressive behavior." The radio was silent for a long moment. Then Command's voice returned, cold and professional. "Bravo 7, confirm your grid reference and describe the nature of your emergency. Are you under attack by hostile forces?" "Negative, Base. This is not hostile forces. This is something else, something that shouldn't exist." Another pause, then, "Bravo 7, are you reporting contact with unknown indigenous wildlife? Recommend you withdraw to a safe distance and continue your mission." Perez looked at the radio in disbelief, then at the massive serpent that was now less than 50 meters from our position. "Base, you're not understanding the scope of this situation. This creature is larger than our patrol boat. It's demonstrating predatory behavior toward human targets. We need extraction now." The creature seemed to respond to the sound of our radio transmissions. Its head turned directly toward our hiding spot, and those massive eyes fixed on us with unmistakable intelligence. For a moment that felt like eternity. We stared into the face of something that had probably been hunting in these waters since before humans set foot in the Americas. Then it began to climb. The serpent's front third rose from the water, revealing powerful muscles that could easily support its massive weight. It began moving up the muddy bank, toward the tree line, toward us, with the deliberate patience of a creature that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Williams was hyperventilating. Thompson had his rifle raised, but seemed paralyzed by the impossibility of the target. Rodriguez was still trying to take photographs, muttering prayers in Spanish between camera clicks. "Do we engage?" I asked Perez, my voice barely a whisper. Perez stared at the approaching creature, doing rapid calculations in his head. Our M16s and single grenade launcher would be useless against something that size. Even our AT-4 anti-tank weapon back at base might not be enough to stop a creature with that much mass and apparent resilience. "Negative," he said finally. "We fall back to secondary position and observe. No engagement unless directly attacked." But as we began our withdrawal, moving as quietly as possible through the dense undergrowth, the creature's behavior changed dramatically. The hunting patience disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like rage. Its massive head swept back and forth, and the rumbling sound from its throat became a continuous, earth-shaking roar. Then we heard something that stopped us all cold. Human screams coming from downstream, in the direction of the Nicaraguan border. Rodriguez raised his binoculars and scanned the area. "Oh God," he whispered. "There's a patrol boat on the river. Looks like Sandinista forces. The creature's moving toward them." Through my camera lens, I could see the small military patrol boat, probably carrying 6 or 8 soldiers, caught in the middle of the river as the massive serpent moved toward them with purpose and speed. The men on the boat were shouting, some raising their weapons, others diving into the water. What followed was a demonstration of predatory efficiency that had been perfected over millions of years of evolution. The creature struck the boat with its head, capsizing it instantly, then began systematically hunting the men in the water. The screams echoed across the jungle for nearly 10 minutes before falling silent. Perez was back on the radio immediately. Base, this is Bravo 7. The biological threat has just attacked and destroyed a Sandinista patrol boat. Multiple casualties confirmed. This creature is actively hostile to human presence in its territory. Command's response chilled me to the bone. Bravo, 7. You are ordered to maintain observation only. Do not, repeat, do not engage unknown wildlife. Continue your reconnaissance mission and report on Sandinista activity only. The creature was feeding now, and the sounds from the river made all of us physically sick. But it was Command's willful blindness to what we were witnessing that truly terrified me. They weren't just dismissing our reports. They were actively ordering us to ignore something that could change the entire strategic picture of the conflict. As the sun began to set over the Rio Coco, painting the sky blood red above the churning waters where El Diablo continued its feast, I realized we had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than a border skirmish between proxy armies. We had discovered a secret that powerful people were determined to keep hidden, no matter the cost. As darkness fell over the jungle, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. While Sergeant Perez continued his increasingly desperate attempts to convince Command of the reality of our situation, I began documenting everything with methodical precision. Every photograph, every detail of the creature's behavior, every inconsistency in our orders, I recorded it all. The serpent had finished feeding and returned to deeper water, but it remained in the area, occasionally surfacing to scan the shoreline with those intelligent amber eyes. It was waiting, watching, as if it understood that more humans would eventually come to investigate the destroyed patrol boat. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Rodriguez whispered, as he noticed me carefully cataloging each roll of film I'd shot. "Evidence," I replied quietly. "Someone needs to document this properly. Command is covering this up before it even happens." Perez overheard us and crawled over to our position. His face was grim, aged years in the span of a few hours. "Listen carefully, both of you. I've been in contact with Command for the past hour. They're sending a cleanup crew to sanitize the area, and they've made it very clear that our official report will state we observed normal Sandinista patrol activity with no unusual incidents." "That's insane," Rodriguez protested. "There are bodies in that river. There's physical evidence of something that could revolutionize our understanding of—" "There's nothing in that river," Perez cut him off sharply. "According to Command, the Sandinista patrol boat suffered mechanical failure and sank with all hands. Engine explosion. Happens all the time with Soviet equipment." I stared at him in disbelief. "Sarge, you saw what we saw. That thing is still out there. What happens when it attacks our forces? What happens when it decides to move upstream towards civilian populations?" Perez's expression darkened. "According to the briefing I just received, indigenous populations have always reported seeing large water snakes in this region. Local folklore, nothing more. Command considers the matter closed." "Folklore?" Williams had crawled over to join our whispered conference. "That thing destroyed an armed patrol boat like it was a toy. It's the size of a subway car and smarter than any animal has a right to be." "Keep your voice down," Perez warned, glancing around nervously. "And I suggest you all start thinking very carefully about how you're going to write your individual reports. Because, according to Command, anyone filing a report that contradicts the official narrative will be subject to immediate psychiatric evaluation and possible discharge for psychological instability." The threat was clear. Acknowledge what we'd witnessed, and our military careers would be over, our credibility destroyed, our futures in jeopardy. But deny it, participate in the cover-up, and become complicit in hiding a threat that could eventually cost innocent lives. I made my choice in that moment, and it wasn't the safe one. "I'm not signing off on a lie," I said quietly but firmly. "Too many people could die if this information gets buried." Perez looked at me with a mixture of respect and pity. "Martinez, you're 22 years old. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away over something that's already been decided at levels far above our pay grade." "With respect, Sergeant, Some things are more important than career prospects. Ubray. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already made backup plans. Before joining the army, I'd worked as a freelance photographer for several small newspapers in Los Angeles. I still had contacts in the media, people who specialized in investigating stories that official sources wanted to suppress. Over the next 3 hours, while we waited for the cleanup crew to arrive, I carefully concealed copies of my most crucial photographs and notes. Rodriguez, despite his initial fear, had decided to support my decision and help me waterproof the evidence packages and hide them in locations we could retrieve later. The cleanup crew arrived by helicopter just after midnight, not regular army personnel, but specialists in unmarked fatigues with equipment I didn't recognize. They worked with military efficiency, using underwater sonar and recovery gear to locate and remove all traces of the destroyed Sandinista patrol boat. More disturbing was their knowledge of the creature. These weren't men encountering El Diablo for the first time. They worked with the practiced coordination of a team that had dealt with similar situations before. They deployed some kind of sonic device that kept the serpent at a distance while they completed their work. Captain Morrison, the team leader, briefed us individually while his men finished their operation. He was professional but cold, making it clear that our experiences that day had never officially occurred. You gentlemen witnessed a tragic accident involving a poorly maintained Soviet patrol boat, he told us. The vessel suffered catastrophic engine failure, resulting in explosion and sinking with all hands. Your quick thinking and professional observation allowed us to locate and recover important intelligence materials from the wreckage. What about the creature? I asked directly. Morrison's expression didn't change. What creature, Specialist Martinez? According to your official report, you observed normal river wildlife during your reconnaissance patrol. Caimans, perhaps. Local fishermen often exaggerate the size of reptiles they encounter. That was no caiman, sir. You know it, and I know it. Your cleanup crew came equipped with specialized sonic devices. You've dealt with this thing before. Morrison studied me for a long moment, then leaned closer. Specialist, let me explain something about national security. There are threats in this world that the general public simply cannot handle knowing about, information that would cause mass panic, destabilize governments, or compromise ongoing military operations. Sometimes the greatest service a soldier can perform for his country is to keep certain secrets. And if that secret kills more soldiers, more civilians, that's not your concern. Your concern is following orders and maintaining operational security. The creature you think you saw is contained within a specific geographical area and poses no threat to broader strategic interests. His words confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of concealment and control. El Diablo wasn't unknown to military intelligence. It was a classified asset being managed by people who viewed it as a strategic resource rather than a threat to human life. As Morrison's team completed their work and prepared to extract us, I realized that my real mission was just beginning. The official channels had been compromised, but the truth had a way of finding alternative routes to the surface. I would spend the next 36 years gathering evidence, building contacts, and waiting for the right moment to expose what really happened on the Rio Coco in December 1986. The creature might have been contained, but the truth couldn't be buried forever. And if my research was correct, El Diablo wasn't the only impossible thing being hidden in the remote corners of America's proxy wars. The extraction helicopter lifted off at 0400 hours, carrying us away from the Rio Coco and back to base. But the real operation was just beginning. As we flew through the pre-dawn darkness, I could see lights on the river below, more cleanup crews, more specialists working to erase any trace of what we'd witnessed. Captain Morrison sat across from me in the helicopter, his eyes never leaving my face. He knew I was the problem, the loose thread that could unravel their carefully constructed narrative. But what he didn't know was that I'd already begun pulling that thread. Back at base, we were immediately separated and taken to individual debriefing rooms. My interrogator was a thin, pale man in civilian clothes who introduced himself only as Mr. Smith. For 6 hours, he walked me through every detail of our patrol, comparing my responses to some kind of prepared script, noting every deviation from the official story. "You seem to have an unusually vivid imagination, Specialist Martinez," he said after my third attempt to accurately describe the creature's size and behavior. "Combat stress can cause soldiers to misinterpret normal wildlife encounters. Perhaps you saw a large caiman or river dolphin and, in the heat of the moment, your mind exaggerated its proportions." "River dolphins don't destroy patrol boats," I replied, "and caimans don't grow to 80 feet in length." Smith made a note on his clipboard. "According to Sergeant Perez's report, the patrol boat suffered mechanical failure. You never actually witnessed any direct interaction between local wildlife and enemy forces." I stared at him in disbelief. "You've already gotten to Perez?" "Sergeant Perez filed an accurate and professional report of your patrol activities. I suggest you do the same." But even as Smith tried to manipulate my testimony, I could see signs that the cover-up was having unintended consequences. Through the window of the debriefing room, I watched unusual activity around the base. Helicopters arriving and departing at odd hours, personnel in unmarked vehicles, communication equipment being upgraded rapidly. Most telling was the arrival of a team of civilian scientists, men and women with the pale complexion and nervous energy of academics, who'd been pulled from their comfortable university positions and thrust into a classified military operation. They worked with marine biologists' equipment, specialized sonar, underwater cameras, chemical analysis gear. During a bathroom break, I managed to overhear part of a heated conversation between two of these scientists. Unprecedented size for any known anaconda species, the metabolic requirements alone would suggest, not a natural phenomenon. The electromagnetic signatures indicate possible artificial enhancement. Containment protocols were clearly insufficient. If it decides to migrate upstream, they were studying El Diablo, trying to understand it, possibly trying to control it. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was an active research program, and our encounter had apparently disrupted their work. When I returned to the debriefing room, Smith's demeanor had changed. He was less patient, more aggressive, and he'd been joined by a military psychologist, Dr. Helen Foster. "Specialist Martinez," Dr. Foster said in a soothing voice, "you've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural for the mind to create elaborate fantasies as a way of processing combat stress. What you think you saw was likely a stress-induced hallucination triggered by the destruction of the enemy patrol boat. Multiple witnesses experienced the same hallucination?" I asked. "Group psychology is a well-documented phenomenon. When one member of a unit experiences a stress reaction, it can influence the perceptions of others. But even as they worked to discredit my testimony, other events were confirming the reality of what we'd witnessed. That afternoon, 3 more Sandinista patrols disappeared in the same stretch of river. Radio intercepts revealed panicked reports from Nicaraguan forces about a monster serpent attacking their positions. The Sandinista military command, apparently unaware of any American research program, began deploying heavier weapons to the border region. They brought in Soviet-supplied RPGs and even requested air support to deal with what they described as an unknown biological weapon. This escalation triggered an immediate response from US forces. Additional troops were deployed to the border, officially to counter increased Sandinista aggression, but actually to prevent the conflict from exposing the creature's existence to international observers. Rodriguez found me during evening chow, looking haunted and exhausted. He'd clearly been through his own intensive debriefing session. "They're offering me a promotion and transfer to a cushy posting in Germany," he whispered. "All I have to do is sign a statement saying we encountered normal river wildlife during our patrol. Are you going to take it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Martinez, I've got a wife and 2 kids back home. They're threatening court-martial if I don't cooperate. What am I supposed to do?" I understood his position, but I also knew that our silence would only enable whatever dark program was being conducted in that jungle. "Do what you have to do for your family," I told him. "But remember that somewhere out there, El Diablo is still hunting, and people are still dying." That night, I was awakened by the sound of helicopters and unusual activity around the base perimeter. Through my barracks window, I could see vehicles moving toward the river, their headlights cutting through the jungle darkness. Something big was happening, something that required immediate military response. The next morning, we received word that a Contra supply convoy had been attacked during a river crossing. Officially, it was blamed on a Sandinista ambush, but I recognized the signs. The survivors described a massive serpent emerging from the water, destroying vehicles and pursuing fleeing men through the jungle. But now both sides were experiencing losses, and the creature was becoming increasingly active. Whatever containment protocols had been in place were clearly failing. Captain Morrison appeared at my bunk before dawn on the 3rd day after our encounter. "Specialist Martinez," he said quietly, "you're being transferred effective immediately. Special assignment to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Consider it an opportunity to start fresh, away from the complications of border operations." "No, what about my squad?" "Your squad is being disbanded. Rodriguez and Williams are being transferred to different units. Thompson has been granted early discharge for psychological reasons. Sergeant Perez is being promoted and assigned to staff duties." They were scattering us, ensuring that we could never again corroborate each other's testimony about what we'd witnessed. But they were also revealing the scope of their concern. This wasn't just a local cover-up, but a systematic effort to control information at the highest levels of military command. As I packed my gear for transfer, I made a final decision that would define the rest of my life. The evidence I'd hidden near the Rio Coco would remain there, waiting for the right moment to surface. But I would begin a new mission, documenting similar incidents, building a network of witnesses, and preparing for the day when the truth could no longer be contained. Because El Diablo wasn't just a local phenomenon. If my research was correct, it was part of something much larger, much older, and much more dangerous than anyone in official circles was willing to admit. The creature in the river was just the beginning. 36 years have passed since that December night on the Rio Coco, and the world has changed in ways that would have been unimaginable to that young soldier who first witnessed El Diablo. The Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, and the proxy conflicts of Central America faded into historical footnotes. But some secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they're buried. My transfer to Fort Bragg marked the beginning of a parallel career that I've maintained alongside my official military service and later civilian life. What started as a personal quest for truth evolved into something much larger, a network of witnesses, researchers, and truth seekers dedicated to exposing the hidden realities that powerful institutions work so hard to conceal. The evidence I concealed near the Rio Coco remained undisturbed for 15 years, protected by the ongoing instability in the region. When I finally returned to Honduras in 2001, ostensibly as a security consultant for an American mining company, I was able to retrieve not only my original photographs and notes, but additional evidence that had accumulated over the years. The local villagers, it turned out, had been documenting El Diablo's activities for decades. They possessed oral histories, crude drawings, and even some remarkable photographs taken by brave individuals who'd managed to capture images of the creature during its periodic feeding periods. More importantly, they'd recorded a pattern of government cover-ups that stretched back to the 1940s. According to village elder Carlos Mendoza, whose grandfather had been a shaman in the region, El Diablo was not a natural creature. It had been created sometime in the early 20th century by what he described as men from the north, scientists who'd come to the jungle with strange equipment and ancient knowledge, conducting experiments that violated the natural order. They thought they could create the perfect weapon, Mendoza told me in 2001, his weathered hands tracing symbols in the dirt. Something that could destroy armies without leaving evidence. But they lost control of their creation, and now it hunts according to its own will. This revelation led me to declassified documents from the 1950s, when the CIA had conducted biological warfare experiments throughout Central and South America. Project MK-Ultra was just the tip of the iceberg. There were dozens of classified programs exploring everything from mind control to genetic manipulation. Many of them conducted in remote locations where oversight was minimal and local populations could be easily silenced. By 2010, I'd established contact with Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist at the University of California who'd been investigating reports of anomalous creatures in remote waterways around the world. Her research had uncovered similar incidents in the Amazon, the Congo River Basin, and remote areas of Southeast Asia, all locations where American or Soviet military forces had conducted classified biological research during the Cold War. What you witnessed in Honduras, Dr. Chen told me during our first meeting, appears to be part of a global pattern. Someone or some group has been creating these creatures for decades, possibly longer. The question is why, and whether they're still active. Our investigation expanded to include former military personnel from conflicts around the world. Vietnam veterans reported encounters with massive serpents in the Mekong Delta. Soviet veterans described similar creatures in Afghanistan's remote valleys. Even more recent veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan had stories that eerily paralleled my own experience. Encounters with impossible creatures, followed by immediate cover-ups and threats to their careers. The breakthrough came in 2018, when a former CIA researcher named Dr. Marcus Webb came forward with documents proving the existence of something called Project Ouroboros, a classified program that had been creating genetically enhanced creatures for use as biological weapons since the 1940s. Webb had worked on the project for 20 years before his conscience finally overcame his oath of secrecy. The serpents were just one type. Webb revealed in recorded testimony that I helped him prepare. There were enhanced primates, modified big cats, even aquatic humanoids. The goal was to create deniable biological assets that could be deployed in enemy territory without leaving fingerprints that could be traced back to American operations. But the program had spiraled out of control decades ago. Many of the creatures had escaped containment, established breeding populations in remote areas, and were now essentially wild populations of artificial apex predators. El Diablo, according to Webb's documentation, was actually one of the more successful containments. It had remained within a limited geographical area for over 70 years, feeding primarily on military targets rather than civilian populations. The revelation that changed everything came in 2020, when satellite imaging revealed that El Diablo was not alone. There were at least 6 similar creatures inhabiting river systems throughout Central America, all of them apparently products of the same research program. Worse, they seemed to be communicating with each other across vast distances, possibly coordinating their activities. This discovery prompted me to make a decision I'd been avoiding for 3 decades. It was time to go public. Working with Dr. Chen, Dr. Webb, and a team of investigative journalists, I began preparing a comprehensive exposé that would reveal not only the existence of El Diablo and its siblings, but the entire shadow network of biological weapons research that had been operating in secret for nearly a century. The process took 2 years of careful documentation, legal preparation, and protective measures for everyone involved. We knew that exposing this information would trigger massive retaliation from government and military authorities. But we also knew that the truth could no longer be contained. In March 2022, the Ouroboros files were simultaneously published by newspapers and online platforms in 12 countries, revealing the full scope of Project Ouroboros and its modern descendants. The response was immediate and explosive. Government denials, congressional hearings, international investigations, and a global demand for transparency about biological weapons research. More importantly, the revelation has led to active containment efforts for the surviving creatures. El Diablo and its siblings are now being monitored by an international team of scientists working to develop humane methods of management that don't require the deadly secrecy that has characterized government responses for the past 70 years. As I write this in 2023, at the age of 59, I can finally say that the mission I began as a frightened young soldier has reached its conclusion. The truth about El Diablo is no longer hidden in classified files and threatened witnesses. The creature still hunts in the waters of the Rio Coco, but now it does so under careful scientific observation rather than government cover-up. The legacy of that December night in 1986 extends far beyond one encounter with an impossible creature. It represents the triumph of truth over institutional secrecy, of individual conscience over bureaucratic intimidation, and of scientific transparency over military expedience. Rodriguez, Williams, and Thompson never lived to see this vindication. They all died within a few years of our encounter, victims of what the Veterans Administration classified as stress-related illnesses, but which I now recognize as targeted elimination of inconvenient witnesses. Only Sergeant Perez and I survived long enough to see the truth emerge, and Perez chose to maintain his silence until the very end. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The Ouroboros files have led to international treaties governing biological weapons research, mandatory oversight of classified programs, and protection for military whistleblowers who report evidence of dangerous or illegal activities. Most importantly, young soldiers today know that if they encounter something impossible in the field, they have alternatives to the silence that was forced on my generation. Truth, it turns out, really can triumph over power, but only if someone is brave enough to preserve it until the moment is right for revelation. El Diablo still hunts in the waters of the Rio Coco, but it no longer hunts alone in the darkness of official denial. And sometimes that makes all the difference.